The Martian is so unrealistic. I mean, why didn't he just tunnel through the center of the planet using his mining blaster's space laser and warp jump to another planet with better resources? What? A little No Man's Sky obsessed, am I? Am you? Okay, so early reviews of this game have been mixed. Should we be surprised though? I mean, yes, in the sense that the universe is a pageant of unremitting mystery brindled with the glorious unknown, but in a much more narrow sense, no, we shouldn't be surprised at all. There are way too high expectations for this game, and it really isn't the fault of the developers. What started as a kinda indie tech demo has become a veritable religion thanks to a lush, otherworldly aesthetic, ambitious tech, and sparse details of things like plot and gameplay. People assume it plays great because it looks great, and they don't really know how it plays. The developer emphasizes exploration over the adventures of endgame, traversing worlds over space battles, and yet so many people think it's going to be the next Elite Dangerous or EVE Online. As a result, you might be let down by its lack of clear direction or purpose. You may have blown your tiny stinking mind and be living in a digitally generated universe vastly stretching off into oblivion. The emphasis from the press has been nothing, if not breathless.
Programmer and genius. This is literally the most open world game of all time. You are literally God.
IGN has had more than 40 exclusive in-depth demonstrations that somehow managed to avoid delving too deep into the gravy of gameplay. Have there been games bigger in scope for their time? Have we seen this setting before? Well, yes. So what makes this game any different? Why do we care? Why don't the pundits doom this one to the obscurity of the bargain shelf at Babbage, Software Etc. or Steinberg's? I'm going to go back to find the first games of its kind so that we can answer that question. In today's Which Game First? Oh man, so glad to be going back to the past to play those old games we have a theory about. A game theory. Well, one episode in and we're already relying on reference-based humor. That's a good sign. No Man's Sky is exciting for two main reasons. One, the procedural generation system, which seems to allow virtually unlimited worlds, weapons, ships, and kinda bland fish. And two, the aesthetic. I would argue that the seamless space-to-world transitioning is a close third, followed by the chance to name things after your butt. So, what is procedural generation, and where did it start? Is it like the Pepsi generation? No, you goofs! It's a video game thing! I don't want to delve too deep into every single procedurally generated game of the last 30 years. So let's go back almost 50 years. Well, the first procedurally generated computer program is generally understood to be Conway's Game of Life, somehow from 1970. The first thing we'd recognize as a procedurally generated video game is probably the 1978 title Beneath Apple Manor. You know it's old because it doesn't have Darkness, Shadow, or Blood War in the title. Can you best the apple? I guess Nectarine Bungalow and Condo of the Kumquats were already taken. Beneath Apple Manor was one of the earliest random dungeon battler or roguelike games, actually predating the more famous Rogue by 2 years. It used a mathematical algorithm to generate a rudimentary tile-based map that players had to traverse to get a treasure deep beneath the surface of a dark and mysterious pixelated image of a mansion. It was pretty popular in its time, and BAM, BAM and Rogue were among the first to pave the road for procedural generation to be used in a video game. We don't want to get bogged down there. There are a lot of roguelikes, and No Man's Sky isn't one of them. Instead of using procedural generation to make maps or chunks of maps, or slot in enemies or treasures, No Man's Sky generates a universe in math alone, and then only activates or reveals that math when the player approaches a planet. In other words, the rules of the world are such that planets, stars, minerals, and their component elements should exist at certain places with certain configurations. It's the observer that makes those lands corporeal. Sort of like Schrodinger's galaxy. Fancy talk for when you go there, math makes stuff appear. Why, to find somebody else with such an ambitious idea, you'd have to zoom forward all the way to, 1984? Long before Elite Dangerous, the 2014 MMO sequel, Elite was the first space game to really build its engine on procedurally generated content. If you haven't heard of it, well, good for you. I mean, this is a pretty stupid and pointless... shame on you! You should know everything about video games, noob. Elite was a massive seller on the BBC Micro, eventually selling between 600,000 and 1 million copies, making it the most popular video game of all time, with the exception of Super Mario Bros., Tetris, Flick Fishing, and Doodle Jump, and Myst 2, and Nobunaga's Ambition, and a few thousand other games. Alright, but it was popular. So what makes Elite such a great analog to No Man's Sky? I mean, it's digital, right? Get it? It's analog, digital, fuck it. Elite was one of the first deep space exploration and trading sims, but it certainly wasn't the only one. Elite Dangerous has over 400 billion star systems and would purportedly take thousands of generations to fully explore. While this is a tiny portion of the estimated 5 billion years it would take to explore all of No Man's Sky, I don't think that's going to make a huge difference to the average player. Ugh, I've been playing the same game for like 25,000 years and I'm totally running out of content. RIP ripoff. 2 out of 10 stars, 75% on IGN. The point is that while Elite was reasonably successful, not a lot of people know just how crazy ambitious it was. The original concept was also enormous, nearing the expansive territory of No Man's Sky. See if any of this sounds familiar. The original plan was for Elite to have around 2 to the 48th power galaxies. That's approximately 282 trillion galaxies, each with 256 solar systems containing unique planets, trade routes, and political alliances. And it looked like this! Pretty spiffy, right? I mean, look at those tiny balls. Editor Josh, actually, Google Elite tiny balls for me. I mean, it's for a friend. Elite was a massive achievement for its time, considering there had been no space game using procedural generation to that point, so nobody could guess whether it was going to sell or not, and especially given the technical limitations of that time. The last pieces of content
was to use the last few bytes of the computer's memory to redesign this old 2D control panel to a 3D radar system.
It was lauded as a masterpiece by game reviewers and went on to have a multi-decade fan following. Out of the handful of sequels and rehashes, they all pretty much went to a niche market at best. The critical and conceptual success of Elite led to a bunch of imitators, some great, some not so great. Some made extensive use of procedural generation for content, some did not. I could name follow-ups to Elite for hours if I
spoke slowly enough
and showed lots of pictures. But No Man's Sky is only like Elite in its scope. What got people excited about No Man's Sky isn't the combat or the trading, it's this. This bit here. That seamless moment between ground and, well, sky. One thing No Man's Sky has that Elite and games of its ilk does not. There's planet-sized planets which you can land, explore, pillage, and die alone on. It's realism. Even recent games like EVE Online, one of the largest and most popular MMO space exploration and trading games, lacks the rich planets promised by No Man's Sky. So is No Man's Sky the first massive space sim with whole worlds to explore in depth? Well, no. The exact same year Elite came out, another space sim called Rescue on Fractalis came out, a Lucasfilm adventure action game that used fractal generation technology to procedurally generate massive worlds with a dense, toxic climate, much like my high school. The world of Fractalis used procedural generation, but it wasn't anywhere near as deep or as expansive as Elite. Nevertheless, it was one of the first with true 3D worlds. The next major release to have 3D explorable procedurally generated worlds was the Federation of Free Traders, a space trading exploration and battle sim from Gremlin. FOFT was a massive project featuring whole worlds you could land on, explore, and exploit for them sweet riches. And I know most of you haven't heard of it. I've barely heard of it. Free Traders isn't even Wikipedia apart from a Nederlander stub. The Free Traders universe consists of 32,768 procedural galaxies, each comprising 256 solar systems of 16 planets. That's big. And unlike Elite, you could... Holy shit, that's the music. Oh, great. Now my pants are pregnant again. Anyway, unlike Elite, you could actually land on 3D generated planets in this game, which nobody played because it was so incredibly complicated. It was definitely made by diseased alien intelligence. The game suffered from numerous bugs, slowdown, and exploits, so it was not as popular as Elite. But if one space-touching shoot game with big round planets isn't enough, how about Noctis? A year 2000... Title. Noctis was a space sim more similar to No Man's Sky in its emphasis on exploration over trade and combat. Like Elite, Noctis was massive, taking place in a galaxy over 90,000 light years across, which is about double the size of the Milky Way galaxy, including billions of explorable worlds. A beautiful, complex concept that just happened to look like someone spilled porridge on an electron microscope. And that's not it. Do you remember that I said there were a handful of Elite sequels? Most of these were not direct sequels per se, but followed the same formula. Giant galaxies, alien worlds to get shot and die penniless, space being the 1930s Chicago of video game land. These games were huge though, making the claim that No Man's Sky is somehow unique laughable. Alright, it would be laughable if it weren't such an insanely technical field of one-upsmanship. Now, we're talking about procedural generation, and if you want to see what kind of complex structures that can be created with procedural generation alone, you could look no further than 2004's Krieger, or KK Rieger. It's German. Now, this game is better saved for a future episode of Which Game First, because there's a lot to it. But let's just say that the game generates an entire FPS procedurally, and only took up about 100 kilobytes of space, essentially fitting on one of those gigantic floppy disks your grandfather stored his assy porn on. Editor Josh, Google your grandfather's big floppy disks. I want to see your grandfather's big floppy disk. So if it isn't just the size, the planet-sized planets, or procedural generation technology, why did everybody go nuts for this game? Well, maybe it's the richness and diversity of each world. I mean, remember that bit I showed you, that bit that got everybody's pants wet? Well, it's worth noticing that this is what happens just before that. That's right.
Dinosaur aliens.
Can you name a space sim with motherfucking dinosaurs in it? Didn't think so. Unless you count Dino Crisis, and we're not going down that road. It puts me in the mind of an art book I had as a teen, Expedition, by illustrator Wayne Douglas Barlow. So have there been other massive space games with these innovative and highly alien aesthetics? Well, crucially, no. Not exactly. I mean, unless there was a game with even bigger expectations than No Man's Sky. Spore. Okay, if you haven't been paying attention to the last 8 years in gaming, you might not have any idea how Spore could possibly be connected to No Man's Sky. Well, I'm not the first to talk about this connection. Spore was an evolution simulator from the creators of SimEarth, another evolution simulator, Sim Farm, Sim Life, another evolution simulator, SimCity, SimSims, The Sims, and the polydimensional existence matrix that we all live in. It promised massively ambitious gameplay, including tracking life forms from single-celled organisms to a universe-spanning space super race. Worlds were randomized and creatures were created by the players. The wonky physiology of the system led to some interesting results. Oh, another penis! How droll! Much like No Man's Sky, Spore offered a unique and lush aesthetic, worlds populated with fascinating alien creatures, and even expanded to a multi-planet multiplayer encapsulated in a massive virtual galaxy containing 500,000 stars, each surrounded by numerous planets. This may be a small number compared to the millions or billions offered in early Atari and Commodore 64 space simulators, but it was and still is a massive goal for a game with interactive planets and fully realized complex creatures living in their own herds, societies, and civilizations. And yet, Spore is regarded as a commercial flop with a lot of hate from a lot of gamers. Sure, some people are still playing it today, but suffice to say a combination of DRM woes and underwhelming repetitive gameplay killed the concept for a huge number of people. No Man's Sky is different in the technology it harnesses and the emphasis of the gameplay, but it faces the same risks. The game is huge, like Spore, with worlds populated with alien creatures, like Spore, and unfinished and even non-existent multiplayer. And yet what No Man's Sky promised was so different than Spore. We shouldn't be looking at it as the next big galactic domination game. From Elite to FOF, there's other huge trading, exploring, and fighting games. And games like EVE Online or Elite Dangerous have added amazing multiplayer. And there are tons of other space combat games in production right now with huge universes. It frankly doesn't matter how big the universe is if you're not interested in that gameplay. What got people excited about No Man's Sky isn't its bigness. When people saw those first trailers, they had no idea how large the universe was, but they could tell that there was a unique aesthetic being presented, a version of alienness. No Man's Sky builds on those previous games, but has its own particular niche, and that's what makes it interesting for me. So if you're not interested in exploring strange worlds with strange creatures, if you're just going to rush to the end, you're probably going to miss the whole thing that makes No Man's Sky unique. Everything from the Elite series to Fractalis to EVE Online, even early procedural adventures like Beneath Apple Manor and Rogue had some new piece of technology, some new innovation that lit the stars on No Man's Sky's path. Will we get bored of more planets populated with bizarre flora and fauna? It's easy to feel diverse and testing with a small team, but when thousands or hundreds of thousands of players tell their story, will the game seem different enough to them? Will my space dinosaurs be unique enough from your space dinosaurs? NMS is a product of its history and its own time. If we want to cut through that hype and look at what we really like about a game, the first step is to look back at that history and explore which game first. Alright girls, thanks for watching. This is my second episode in less than a month because I really wanted to hit those two topics while anybody still cared. If people like these episodes, I have ideas for plenty more, but they're going to take a little longer to write and edit. And while I'm working, please like, subscribe, show me you're interested so I can keep making them. We don't advertise our videos, so if you do like us, please share with your friends. It's the only way anybody's gonna see this stuff. So if you watched all the way through it and somehow didn't like it, remember you can always check out our Let's Play series. We've got lots of content, and I hope there's a little weirdness for everyone. Till next time, this is Blake from the Super Speers Brothers. Good luck, and have fun.